agent experience is an extension of developer experience. Developer experience, it's greater than the sum of all of its parts. It's not a question of whether or not agents are working on your code base or on your platform. They are. The question is whether or not you're supporting those. But where we are today is this thing I call this mini one-person band problem. So figure out what they're using, figure out what's working, what's not. And the reality is, if there is a gap in knowledge, it will confidently make things up or decide for you. To combat this, context files are where you need to spend your initial time. And if you couldn't simplify something, make it obvious. One practice that I really enjoy doing is like an agent therapy session. Like, what should we do better to make sure that you're gonna get this right next time? And specifically update the context files to make sure that happens. Ephemeral environments are something I'm a huge fan of. At Netlify, we do deployments, like pre-prod deployments or preview deployments, and they're amazing feedback tools for everything that's not specifically code related. As Bon Scott said from AC/DC, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. It's a much more enjoyable ride if you're with your friends and with your band and you're going together.
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode. We have a second 30-minute keynote before we jump into main tracks. And that next keynote is going to be from Sean Roberts from Netlify, who's the VP of Applied AI. Now, this is a really interesting session because I think when we think about how we have built software over time, and we think about our core kind of like ICP when we build that software, we think about the user, and the user being very often a human, a developer, or just a consumer of our services. But times have changed with the adoption of agents being, so in our face with everything AI. It's important that when we think about, providing these services, providing these tools, we think about agents as users of that as well as developers. And so this session is really going to kind of like compare the two and talk about how we can plan with agents in mind as our users. So please welcome on stage, Sean Roberts.
Yeah. Thanks for that. All right. Hello, everyone. As Simon said, I'm Sean Roberts. I lead the AI programs at Netlify. And I've been working, trying to make the web better, more secure, faster for a very long time. And especially at Netlify, I've been really trying to figure out how we can provide the best agent experience that we can for our platform, but also trying to figure out how the web and agents can work really well together. And so with that, let's dive into the talk today around agent experience. And I don't know the makeup of the crowd, but if you don't know what this is referencing, that's not a me problem. Take a picture, share with your friendly neighborhood AI agent, and they will tell you it's definitely in the training data. But really what we're talking about today is how agent experience is an extension of developer experience. A quick raise of hands or horns here. Who is a senior plus dev or in charge of a code base today? A bunch of you. Yeah, horns, yes. All right, raise your hands again if you feel like you are a steward of the developer experience of your code base today. Yes. All right, well, thank you for your service. This is often a very thankless task, but it's incredibly important because as we know, developer experience really is the sum, it's greater than the sum of all of its parts, right? To have a great developer experience, you really need to have good documentation, onboarding. There's an intuitive design that goes into it. It's an intentional act that you put into it. But the reality is if you're allowing people to develop on your platform or on your code base, you have a developer experience. That does not mean it's good. It just means you have one. Just like every software has a user experience if they have users. And with agent experience, it's very similar, right? We have hit this critical mass where it's not a question of whether or not agents are working on your code base or on your platform. They are. The question is whether or not you're supporting those. And when we talk about agent experience, we do mean that kind of holistic experience that an agent has interacting with your system or your code base. And to illustrate this, right, again, when we think about developer experience, we think about these developers over here who are handcrafting beautiful, error-free, artisanal code. It's great. And the quality of them going from here to here is really determined by the quality of the developer experience. And now we have developers who are delegating work to agents to do parts of this on their behalf. And when we talk about agent experience, we're talking about this connection here. So how well are they able to achieve the same amount of work? And this connection is all predicated on how well the agent experience is. And I think it's very important to emphasize we're talking a lot about the agent's experience here, but this is all to benefit the human developer on the other side of it. This has nothing to do with replacing developers. There are developers delegating work to an agent, and the more successful we can make them, the more successful we can make them, right? That's the whole point of this. It's also worth noting that when we talk about agent experience, we're talking about it today in regards to a code base, but an agent experience is this discipline that spans much broader, right? Going forward, e-commerce is going to have to figure out how they serve their customers who are using agents to buy on their behalf. Flights, how they book flights and airline tickets when an agent was used to delegate. So it's not specific to us, but it's very important, as right now agents are best at working with our code bases. But as Guy described, they have a lot of room for improvement. So one more time, who's in charge of the developer experience of their code base here? Yeah, a lot of left hands. A lot of people decided not to. But now, every one of you holding your hands up, and probably everyone in this room, really, you're also in charge of the agent experience. It doesn't, maybe that used to be a question mark before. It's not anymore. It is a part of serving developers, is acknowledging the fact that developers are using agents to also work with your code base. So you have this charge now. It's very straightforward, but there's having an agent experience and using agents isn't a new thing. But where we are today is this thing I call this mini one-person band problem. We've all, have gone off, our teams individually have gone off, figured out what works for them, and they've kind of culminated their view of the world, and they have their whole setup, right? And then 2 days ago, Gemini 3 came out, and someone with 10 years of experience using anti-gravity IDE said you should stop what you're doing here and then switch to this. And so someone will, and then now your team kind of expands its surface area and so forth. And then, there's going to be another tool next week, and the next a few weeks, and we get this kind of sprawl. We have individually went out, figured things out, and we've built this. This is the kind of mini one-person band problem that we see with developer AI native tooling today. How many of you have gone to a band where there's 4 or 5 of these playing at the same time? Or gone to a concert where there's 4 or 5? Yeah, 0 of you, because they can't. But because this is not a band. These are 3 individuals maybe trying to do their own thing, maybe towards the same end, but this is not a band, okay? This is a band. So, again, ask your AI. This is a band. They have purpose-built, tools. They are all trying to come together for the same goal to make great experiences for their customers, their audience, right? And that's really important because together they're able to do far more than any one person band, right? And for those who like the orchestra metaphor better, there you go. All right, so now what is it that we actually need to do in order to have a better agent experience, to improve the developer experience of our code bases? And thankfully, Guy did a lot of the examples and homework for me earlier, so that's awesome. But I'll dive into the other parts of it. I think what's really important for us to make sure that it's clear on is there's no specific solution. I wish we could say this, if you do this, you're done, pack it up, let's go home. But there's not. Agent experience is a discipline, not a specific tool. Okay. And so if you're thinking about, okay, I have to support agents, so I just need an MCP server. That's all I need. Check the box, done. That's thinking far too narrowly about this problem. And whether it's MCP, A2A, ACP, these are all solutions that are kind of under the umbrella of an agent experience. But the other reality is we're all still figuring it out. We have a lot of ideas about what works today, and then we're going to prove those wrong tomorrow, and then we're going to keep iterating on it. But we're right in the middle of it. And so where should you actually start? So this is going to be my recommendation around the kind of crawl, walk, run stages that you can take on to start either start your journey or expand it going forward. So the first thing, like if your team is just a bunch of one-person bands or not doing any of this at all, start with figuring that out, right? Like I think that there's a hunch, yeah, my team's using AI, whatever. Like we're AI native. It's like no, like figure out what they're using, ask them, figure out what's working, what's not, and this doesn't have to be a big effort. Get a Google form, whatever, vibe code it, and just ask them what agents are they using, what's working well, and to be clear, don't ask them the question that we asked them a year ago, 2 years ago. We're like, have you tried any agents? It's like no, like everyone's probably tried an AI tool, but what we want to know is what people are using every day or every other day, what's working, what's not. And it's important to understand that for many reasons, but not least of which is the fact that there are lots of AI agents and tools and combinations of them. And then all the work that you're going to be doing to improve the agent experience, this helps scope it much better. Just understand what people are doing. If they're using spec-driven development, that might be a little different looking of an agent experience than if they're using some other tool or they're really into stuff like Lovable or Bolt.new, things like that. So audit what people are doing, figure out what's going on, and then start to build your internal community, right? All that really, all that is really involved in doing that is getting them together infrequently, but get them together to talk about the issues that they're running into, talk about the tools that they're using. If you really want to learn something cool, come up with a problem or take some ticket off the board and say, hey, I'm going to solve this together and I'm going to watch you solve it your way, I'm going to solve it my way, and we're going to learn together. And that's some version of pair programming here, where there's also an AI agent involved. And that is so illuminating in terms of like what people understand differently about the different, either the code base, how they approach the problem. And it will also start to build up your internal community to build towards an agent experience. So taking the next step forward, right? You know the agents that you need to support. Now you need to help them be better. Guy did a fantastic job of explaining this for me earlier with some data around backing up that the LLMs themselves are not sufficient in terms of understanding your code base. And the reality is if there is a gap in knowledge, it will confidently make things up or decide for you. It's not always made up, false. It just might just be totally different. Like his example of picking a theme that was not the right theme. To combat this, right? Context files are where you need to spend your initial time, right? Either, depending on the tools, right? Agents.md files, steering files, Claude files, Claude.md files. These are going to be very important nuggets of information. And, some rules of thumb that I think about is if you couldn't simplify something, make it obvious, right? So many code bases you see like, okay, to run a test suite, it's this some magical command that you got to run. That's not obvious. If you have those, make sure that they're in your context. Other areas are like if you have a decoupled architecture, so you have a front end that's decoupled from your back end, which might be decoupled from your data layer, etc. it doesn't necessarily know those connections, and you need to make those clear, or it will make those connections. It'll make them up every time, and that's going to be incredibly important. And especially whenever you get into this world of, as people are iterating on this, and they start finding that, hey, something that we thought was obvious wasn't. It's going to keep making those things up, and adding those into your agents files and steering files is going to be incredibly important. The next thing I mentioned is the core dependency documentation. I had mentioned the core dependency of the front end has a dependency on this back end. It's over here. Here's how you use it. Here's how you find information about it. And that's incredibly important. But there's also this problem of dependency documentation in like third-party modules, things like that, even first-party separated modules. And Guy went in a lot of detail about that. This has been bothering me for so long because, you know, the reality is, especially with, you know, brownfield type of projects, is I have developers, or sort of the model is trained on version 1 of my API. The latest version is version 3, but all my developers are using version 2. And so like it messes it up 9 times out of 10. And the tooling for getting this right isn't great today. I was actually, you know, writing this, I was very stoked to see Tessl's, you know, registry and things like that they're doing. And so I'm going to explore that more. I think that's very exciting. I definitely agree that there's actually more onus needs to be put on the open source community to deliver these things. The way I kind of see the Tessl registry is like, well, if every dependency had to have its types hosted somewhere else, right? Like really the types, the documentation for it really needs to be there. But we also have the second problem where, especially open source repos, there's people who build on them and then there's people who use them, and those are different documentation. And so like even it still gets a little bit harder and harder the more you try to optimize. But again, we're all figuring this out together, so that's fine. If you use context 7, that's also something that people use. I've run into issues with it not doing very well on the versioning side of things. But regardless, if you have a key dependency that's a third-party module, make sure it's in your context. Make sure you're using it right, especially if it's things like data-based, because it's just such a dense topic and tool set that it ends up getting pretty confused with those types of tools. So make it clear. And especially for very large code bases, the concept of knowledge graphs, there's many different implementations of them. Cognition released DeepWiki and code maps recently. But it's this, you know, the reality is if you have a really large code base and you're asking it to do things, every time that you try to ask it to do something, it's got to kind of figure it out on its own. And the larger the code base, the longer that takes, the more expensive it is, the more likely it is it's going to miss parts or get confused. And this is where knowledge graphs really come in, where you can kind of pre-produce this kind of understanding of the overall architecture, how things relate to one another, and summarize those. And so before it tries to do things, it consults there first. And those are very helpful for larger code bases. Feedback loops are going to be incredibly important. So if you're already getting your internal community together, working with them to say, look, whenever we're having an issue, if a human had to manually intervene in an agent's workflow, get that documented, get that into context. If you're talking to that senior engineer who's been there for 15 years and has all the tribal knowledge in their head, every time you have to consult them, if that doesn't go back in documentation or context, I don't know what you're doing. But like that's this internal feedback loop. You have to have some forcing functions to make sure that your agents understand, because unlike you, they can't go ask necessarily that tenured developer who has all the information in their head. So establish feedback loops with your internal team. One practice that I really enjoy doing is I have this MCP where it's like, okay, if the agent's really going off the rails here, I have it look back and say, what could we have done better here? I mean, it's like an agent therapy session. Like what should we do better to make sure that you're going to get this right next time? And specifically update the context files to make sure that happens. And then, especially like once we do that, assuming it makes sense at the time, having it try again and then go from there. I have a lot of good results with that as well. Sure, most of you, if not all of you, are using AI review tools in your code bases and your CI pipelines and such. So I won't go too deep into that, but like the one thing that I think is an addition on top of that is not only having your AI review tool figure out what's wrong with a thing, but also suggests when there are patterns that were missing from your context files that would have prevented this from happening in the future. So like you're getting towards the step of trying to automate some of this feedback loop. Ephemeral environments are something I'm a huge fan of. At Netlify, we do deployments for like pre-prod deployments or preview deployments, and we can do as many of them as the agent needs or as the developer needs. And they're amazing feedback tools for everything that's not specifically code related, right? So if it's like the style of a thing or the layout of a thing, if it's just making stuff up, you can both have the human review these things as well as, if you want to give access to the agent to review these things on your behalf. These really, and then combining these things. So an agent figures out, okay, I messed up the layout here, I'm going to go fix it. I'm also going to make sure I document this in the context. Now you're really starting to see a full end-to-end picture. And this is ultimately what you kind of end up with a good agent experience and feedback lifecycle. So developers can delegate works to the agents, they generate the code. And this being the agent experience that they have access to here, they are better at doing this because the feedback loop of making sure the context is good, appropriate for the jobs that they're doing, and so on. They can, you have your reviewer agents figuring out, hey, this should have been done differently. I'm going to make sure that they know that going forward. I can also make sure that they can review the actual changes, not just the code, but also the output of that code, and then make suggestions for doing better going forward. Okay, and as we get into the you're really advancing the agent experience of your code base. Shared subagents is a really cool unlock. So shared subagents, these are going to be, like Guy mentioned earlier, these are as simple as just markdown files of defining, hey, this is a specialized agent. Because by default, all these agents are generalists, right? And as we know with full stack developers, they can get the job done, but a specialist is probably going to get it done at least a little bit better, if not completely better. These are your specialized subagents. You define them in a markdown file, and then so you can say, okay, this is our methodology for design. This is our methodology for copywriting. It has our voice and tone in it. This is our data migrations subagent. They are specialized at doing this. And what's going to be really the big difference that you're going to see here is that when you ask it to do something, you have subagents, it's going to say, oh, actually, it's better for this one to go do it, and it will kick that one off, and it has specialized context. Now, imagine you had 5 specializations that you wanted to really hone in on and tune, and you had to throw all of that context into a single Claude MD file or agents MD file. That does not work well, and that's kind of why we have these now. We've figured out that doesn't work well. You overload the context, it gets confused, it starts to steal attention and things like that. So this is shared subagents are very important and really allow you to have a shared way of doing things across your code bases and across your different developers. You have your context files, you have your steering files, and now you have subagents files. You're immediately going to run into, how do I distribute these things? Because as soon as you have more than one repo, as Guy was mentioning, these things are there are things that are repo specific that always should be in the repo, and then there's going to be things that are global. Your voice and tone for your brand, that's a global thing. Your brand style guides, all that stuff, global. How you might, do reviews, all those things are global. But how do you share that across your developer base, which might be, dozens or, potentially thousands of people? And my preferred methodology personally is to centralize these things into the globals into a shared repo, and then having a CLI that people can run to update them and do those things. And I also learned through guys talk that they have this capability on the Tessl platform as well. But I think that once you, like, this is a good problem to have. Okay, we've defined rules, they're working really well in our code bases. We actually need to propagate this so that we're working better across multiple code bases. And centralizing these outside of a single agent, as Guy also mentioned, is incredibly important, right? Because like if it doesn't, like you did this audit, step one, unless they all said I only use Claude Code and they all only use Codex, then picking one agent is a recipe for disaster. Also, if they're all only using one agent, you're probably already setting yourself up for a future problem. Yeah, so centralize these. If you don't use a platform like Tessl, you can use a centralized GitHub repo that also has a CLI to run to do the syncs. And I think really on the bleeding edge of these, optimizing your agent experience, we have these opportunities to run evals on the AX of our code bases. And if you haven't used or done any agent evals, all they really are putting an agent under certain conditions, asking to do certain tasks, and evaluating the performance of it doing those things. But have you ever considered taking now Claude SDK or Codex SDK, throwing that in an eval engine and saying, hey, try to do some stuff on my repo and then help me figure out what I should tell you to do that better. You're doing these things wrong. Guy and the Tessl team have done a lot of this on the open source side of things, but this doing this for your own repo is incredibly important, incredibly validating. It will really help you close the gaps between what's just clear in your documentation today and what's still missing. In addition to helping you fill gaps, it also helps you solve the one-way ratchet problem, or it's Asimov's law of bureaucracy. I totally knew that before yesterday. Which says, right, like laws and regulations, once they're enacted, monotonically just grow. They never contract, and they never substantially get repealed or reduced. And we are seeing that happening with config or with context rules and context as well. They're just growing. We're like, oh, I missed this thing, I'm going to keep adding to it. So, but how do you safely feel confident in peeling back some of those requirements? And how do you you fix this issue, but you cause other issues? How do you feel confident about not doing that? And I think evals for the agent experience is going to be incredibly important. Cool. So we covered a lot of ground in terms of, the developer experience. We all understand that's our charge now. We've been in charge of the developer experience for our code bases, but agent experience is no longer optional. That's a part of what we have to deal with now. Not because we want to support agents, but because we want to support our developers who use agents, okay? And making this, I was really stoked on using the band whole metaphor, because I think what's really important about bands is the size of them doesn't determine the success of them, right? It doesn't matter how big your band is, but what does matter is how well they can perform together and produce great outcomes. And so when we think about all the things that we've heard with like, oh, if you use these tools, you'll be a 10x developer. So now we get one-person band, and this other 10x developer wants to be their own one-person band. But what's really magical is having a 10x team, right? And that really comes when we're all sharing knowledge and we're all working together. As Bon Scott said from AC/DC, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. But I would amend that to say it's a much more enjoyable ride if you're with your friends and with your band and you're going together. So with that, thank you all. Thank you for coming here. Drink some water. Go make good agent experience.